Get started to start with the jibber jabber. You know what I'm saying?
Man. Absolutely.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Talksicology, brought to you by Recovery Unplugged. Here at Talksicology, we talk all things addiction, recovery, and mental health. Tonight's guest, author and interventionalist, Jeff Gould. I'm your co-host, Jason Cabello, and as always, your host and mine, Joseph Gorordo.
Oh, welcome back to what is set to be a raucous episode of Talksicology. Hello, everybody out there in the streaming lands, and welcome. We're glad to have you back. If you're a first-time listener, welcome. We're going to have a good time. Speaking of good time.
We're reunited, and it feels so
Yeah,
good.
we're both on. Yeah, it really makes me sad when I'm not able to be on the show, but it is a fun treat for me to get to listen to it the next day.
Right.
Yeah. So I listened to last week's episode, Jason, with Johnny, and absolutely loved it. It's fantastic.
What a great guy Johnny is, right?
Yeah. I had to fast forward the parts where you're like, oh, Joseph's got 14 years. Like, yay, we love you, Joseph.
I'm sure. Then how did you know verbatim what I said?
Yeah, like that, in that voice, right? How have you been, buddy? What? I feel like I talk a lot on our jibber jabber. I want to know how you're doing.
That's fine. Well, Greg popped on for a second. I'm pretty good, man. It's where I little stressed with work, but that's okay. Gifts of recovery. I have a job that I love. I have a job being creative, and that's all. That's all I ever wanted.
You know what, though? I think we're kind of on the same wavelength this week. I too have been a little stressed at work due to some changes. I've been very much present at the facilities this week, which I normally don't get to do very often.
Right.
But
that's
you
good.
know what? It's been really good. Like getting to spend some time, like really sitting and getting to know some of the folks who are in treatment right now. And man, it just reminds you what this is all about, right?
Yeah, I mean, when I was out in Nashville a couple months back and really was just there, meeting the clients, I got to go to the alumni meeting, and it's a little bit, you know what I mean? It's different than just going down the street to the facility here, which is great. Like, you get to see a whole nother way of the way they do things at Recovery Unplugged, which is a place that saved my life and is saving hundreds of lives every single day, making the world a better place, one song at a time.
Calm down. They don't pay us that much, Jason. But you know what's wild, though, is like even like, working in recovery, right? We've talked about this some, like we deal with death and we deal with loss and we see a lot of really hard things.
Yes.
And we see clients who come to us and have been like, I've been to 30 treatment centers. You yourself, right? What, 20-something treatment centers?
19, and then Recovery Unplugged was my 20th time in treatment, yeah.
But, like, it's still just as exciting, as the first time I saw it happen, like, to see someone, like, get some hope and to see someone who's in treatment, like, really trying to get everything that they can to change their lives.
Yeah, and and it's hard for seasoned vets of going to treatment, when it's just like, what am I going to learn this time that I didn't learn the other umpteen times that I've been to treatment? And it's you don't really I didn't hear anything different my last time in treatment. I didn't hear anything that made, like, I didn't have like some huge epiphany. It was just my perspective changed a little bit. And it's like when you see that happen, like, I love it.
I do.
How are you? Man. Wait, Joseph, you're here and you're there, you're commenting and you're, wow.
Just trying to,
It's magic.
I'm magical. It almost feels like I got to split myself in two. If I could clone a Joseph. But you know what? Like, I don't complain, right? Because my life is super full. right? It's my life no longer consists of sitting around waiting for money to fall on my face or trying to scam stuff to get $20, right?
Ooh, those were the days. Not in a good way, but oh man, yeah. When you put it like that, that really brings it back because, you get that euphoric recall when you're like thinking about being high and all that. But more of my time was spent waiting for that $20. Fucking
Yeah.
miserable, like
Yeah.
pacing, just nothing inside of me waiting for that. And the second something hits, like I run to it, like, oh God, it makes my skin crawl thinking.
Yeah. It reminds me of a Dr. Dog lyric. I couldn't tell you what song it is or what album it's on, but there's a line where he says, I hate when people say those were the days, because what are these then? And I'm like, yeah.
We'll have to
Be
look that
present.
up.
Enjoy those days. Yeah. I don't know if you're into Dr. Dog. No? Never heard of Dr.
Oh
Dog?
yes, yeah, I love Dr. Dog.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry. I started spacing out thinking of the lyrics, thinking if I could come up with the song.
It's I don't know. I'll send it to you later. I can figure it out.
Okay. We'll put it in the Spotify playlist.
Yes, let's do it. Hey, Teresa from Arizona, and Jackie is a loyal listener. Thank you, Jackie, for tuning in. But let's enough jibber jabber.
Enough jibber jabber. Unless you got any let's enough jibber jabber.
No, I don't got any other updates, man. I'm really excited for today's guest. When it occurred to me to invite him on the show, I was shocked at my own stupidity at having never thought about inviting Jeff on the show.
Way to go, stupid.
Yep.
No, I'm just kidding.
Yep. That hey there, internal monologue. How do you know, Jason? But super excited for today's guest. Today's guest is a longtime friend of mine, someone I respect very much in the industry for their integrity. Had a brief stint as an employee at Recovery Unplugged, and a man that I love very much. I would like to present to y'all Mr. Jeff Gould.
Hello, gentlemen. Hello, Teresa from Arizona. I'm once upon a time from Tucson, so I'm sure it's nice and hot out there. It's hot here, so anyway.
Hot here too.
Joseph, thanks so much for inviting me. I was excited all day to do this. Very good to be here. So.
Oh man, I'm glad you're excited about it. And I don't really think we need an icebreaker, but it's a tradition we do here. We do something called the spinning wheel of songs. So, Greg, hit it.
There once was a wheel. It was a special wheel. It was a magical wheel. It was the best damn wheel. It's the spinning wheel of songs. Da-da-da-da.
All right.
Every time. All right, let's spin the wheel and see what we're talking about today.
Jeff, has anybody ever told you have a great radio voice?
I have heard that, as a matter of fact.
You should do some ASMR. Oh, songs that make you feel alive.
Ooh, a song that makes me feel alive. Jason, are you ready? Do you got one?
Yes, and it's not Alive by, what's that band? POD. Definitely not that song. That song does not make me feel alive. But I will have to say Young Americans by David Bowie.
Ooh.
Never fails.
Very nice. So believe it or not, my recent go-to for when I want to feel connected to the soul of the universe is the ABBA classic, Gimme, Gimme, Gimme a Man After Midnight. Just that little flute riff
That
kicked in
intro,
and my soul.
The beginning intro of that song, you'd be hard pressed to find a better 8 to 10 seconds of listening pleasure.
And believe it or not, I recently was in a club environment, and they dropped that chorus in the middle of another song, and that chorus slaps. I mean, the whole crowd yelling, "Gimme, gimme, gimme a man after midnight." It's just, it's an experience not to be missed.
Nice.
All right, Jeff, you're our guest, so you get to go last. What's your song that makes you feel alive?
Okay, so I'm not trying to be hip and be like super obscure, but I've discovered a song by a band called Future Generations called Thunder in the City. And me and Hillary, when we're driving, we just crank that thing up. It's kind of like, I don't know how to describe it. It's kind of poppy, it's kind of techno a little bit out of my sort of rock and roll box that I live my life in, but it just makes me feel good. So if you're out there, Future Generations, Thunder in the City, and just turn it up, and by like the end of the play, you'll be like, yeah, like this is it, man. This is the song. So anyway, yeah.
I'll check it
Love it.
out for sure.
Yeah. And so everybody who's listening, you guys know, but Jeff doesn't know this. We keep a Spotify playlist where we put all of the recommendations. So Jeff's choice will be available for all of y'all's streaming enjoyment. It's really great at the gym, so check it out. So let's get into it, right? Jeffrey, who are you? What do you do? How'd you end up here? Give us. You're a verbose gentleman, so give us the short version.
The short version. So I'm a guy who was born in South Bay, Los Angeles. Dad was married 6 times, which is a whole nother story there. But we split, and Mom split when we were 5, and she wanted to raise her kids in on the God forbidden east side of Tucson, Arizona, which was like when you're dreaming of rock and roll, I mean, the east side of Tucson, super lame, like golf courses. Although I will say, and I know this is a rock-based podcast, I went to Santa Rita High School, which if you're a Super Suckers fan, you know the song Santa Rita High. And I did, in fact, went to high school with the Super Suckers. And they were pretty lame back then. I'll admit it. Like, I've kind of chided them a little bit. Like, you guys were kind of posers. Anyway,
Oh.
so
Hot take. Jeff, isn't Jimmy Eat World from Tucson too?
that I don't know. I
think they're from Arizona. I'm pretty sure they're from Arizona, but I don't remember if it was Tucson or maybe Mesa.
Right. So let's see. Couple of traumatic brain injuries. It's part of what I do. Kind of it's certainly a long and really slow and grinding process of addiction, heroin and alcohol and speed and living on the streets. But I sobered up. November will be 20 years ago. All have been sober. And
Yes.
yeah, came out to Texas, wasn't someplace. Dallas would not have cracked my top 10 of places I wanted to go. But I found myself here. Circumstances brought me here, and the money was really pretty good, and it was a fresh start. And I got to tell you, I mean, Dallas is a bit like the LA of Texas, right? It's very kind of what you drive and how you look.
That is
But-
accurate.
Yeah, but I like it. Like, people are friendly, the city's clean, downtown's lovely at night. It's got a lot of good rock and roll clubs in Deep Ellum. It's been a really good place for me to get my feet situated. And I like to say I run a counseling agency, although it's not so much a brick and mortar thing. But there's 5 of us. We specialize in working with traumatic brain injury and substance use disorder, which is like functional medicine and microcurrent treatments and neurofeedback and coaching and stuff. And then I'm an interventionist and have been for 10 years, actually helping rewrite the test that other interventionists take now through Pennsylvania State on a specialized subcommittee. I was really honored to be asked to be on that committee. But for those out there that have seen the show, A&E intervention, yeah, not unlike that. I've been doing that for 10 years, putting people in facilities and hospitalization and treatment that have kind of been running their family ragged and things like that. So that's my life in a nutshell. Is that a small enough box?
So
short enough?
That is
Okay.
That is Austin Powers in a nutshell. Oh, a minute. Nobody got that. That's okay. Can y'all hear me? Okay.
Now I can.
yeah.
Froze for a second. I got scared. I thought I was going to have to start asking questions.
So Jeff, we got to rewind a little bit. You really just you glossed over. You're like, yeah. So I got a couple traumatic brain injuries. Moving on. I mean, since we're going to be talking about TBIs, like I'm really curious how you got your traumatic brain injuries.
Well, let me start and rewind. If you stay sober long enough, whether you intend to or not, especially there's a process called inventory and 12 steps, but there's kind of a looking back process where you're kind of autopsying your life, either through treatment or counseling, or kind of like a what went wrong, kind of thing, almost like a football team when they get skunked. It's coach pulls it, okay, let's review the tape, and one of the things that was so curious to me, Joseph, because I began to see working in treatment, I began to see parts of myself in the clients I was working with. Like, we had these Russian orphanage kids that were like, push, pull, I love you, I hate you. And they were super dodgy and super emotional. And I was like, God, I relate to that a little bit. And I looked up and like, oh, they have attachment disorder. And then how do you get that? And then I'm like, my childhood was a little like that. So here I am kind of figuring out the pieces of what went wrong. But there was a piece I could never explain to myself. And I'm 15 years sober. And I was always like, and not to be dark or morbid, I think the show's got like a nice light air to it. But there was a period of time between 13 and 19 where I really thought I was possessed by the devil. There was a series of like really, I would say kind of like really dark thought patterns. Like really, I mean, I went from this happy kid that's playing soccer and playing with Legos and stuff to all of a sudden just dreaming about being eaten alive by wolves. It just seemed like overnight. And I never really knew what had happened. And it wasn't until I was working on an intervention case in Roanoke, Virginia, and I was trying to assemble my data, like, why did this girl beat up her mother? Why did this girl run away? Why did this girl just text her mom saying she's going to sell herself on back pages that came from a really good, like, Christian home? And anyway, I probably said too much. I'm like riding the edge of hippie here. But anyway, there was a lot going on with this girl. And what I saw was that she had been in a car wreck and her personality changed. And all of a sudden I found myself assembling the data of my own pieces. Like, wait a minute. When I was 11 years old, I tried to jump a BMX bike over a picnic table. And I mean, ass over hat, just knocked myself out unconscious. And that was when I picked up what you call Erland syndrome, like squinty eyes, like headaches, like sensitive to light. And then 2 years later, with the same friend I was riding a bike with, I was at his house, and for some reason the doors were off the hinges, and I was laying on the ground reading a comic book, and somehow one of these doors that was leaning up against the wall, maybe they were painting or something, but the door tipped, and started just toppled and just started swinging down. And I remember him telling me, hey, look out. And right as I looked up, the corner of that door cracked me across the face, and
Ooh.
with it took about 10 teeth. It like the whole top,
wow.
kind of half of my jawbone kind of curved and went up into where the teeth that were left. I mean, it was massive, instant maxillofacial emergency surgery, and 10 root canals later, 13 or whatever, a couple months later, and my whole head was kind of geared shut and like wired shut and stuff. And all of a sudden after that, I was so emotionally unhinged, so sensitive to criticism, so dark and just hateful inside myself. And Jason and I were talking a little bit about music coming into this, and the good thing was I don't know if it helped me or hurt me, or if it just was what it was, but I found some pretty dark stuff to plug into that probably saved my life at the time, right? Like when I started meeting guys that were playing in these really underground bands, like really fast, like really aggressive music, and that scenery fit the way I felt inside. And so that became my kind of nest from like 1985, until, I don't know, well into the 90s, until yeah.
So like as dark as it was, it gave you like a sense of community, a sense of like maybe other people feel the way I feel, kind of normalize that a little bit for you. Yeah, is that what I'm hearing?
Sure. And
how
it's
old
funny.
were you, Jeff? I'm sorry. How old were you when the door fell off and hit you?
13.
13. Okay. So these are the years when you're already like, who am I? What's going on? Why am I feeling this way? Angry for no reason. And then you get this injury, and this is decades before people know what happens when you get, traumatic brain injuries and how it affects you for the rest of your life. So you're going through your normal growing pains stacked with this, and then
Right.
and then you find punk rock,
And then we
or
threw some
punk
drugs on top of that too.
and some
Right.
drugs, yeah.
And if I were to parse them out, so there's a line in the back of a book called Alcoholics Anonymous, and he says he will eventually reach a point where he cannot picture life with it or without it. He will be at the end at the jumping off place. Now, presumably, they're talking about a man in his mid 50s, but that with or without it spot, I started from the place that they talked about ending up at, where it was so like just unhinged and destructive right out of the gate, and there were so many consequences right from the beginning, and it was like, I can't picture moving forward continuing to do this, and yet I can't picture not doing it. So you just kind of seatbelt yourself on for like the roller coaster of doom. Like, here we go. I know this is leading nowhere good. I wasn't one of those guys that had a number of good years and then I was in the delusion like, nah, it's fine. Like, no, I knew it was a train wreck you guys, my first automobile, it was like it was given to me at like 16 with like a bow on it, and I like told my best friend, I'm like, I would say he dared me, but it was really like I dare myself, like, hey, dude, do you dare me to chug the water out of this bong? And we like slammed the car into this house, almost killing an infant, like 15 minutes later. And the paramedics are there, and the baby's crying, and the mother's like holding the baby, like screaming at me. And the husband comes home from the card game. And I'm just sitting there, and I just knew, like, yeah, this isn't going anywhere good. And that was the beginning, right? And on it went for 14 more years. So,
God, Jeff, I love your stories, man. They're just anyway. So somewhere in the back of my brain, I feel like there's a cool story about the day that you got sober. Like, I want to say something about a homeless guy with like a punk rock jacket involved. Am I crazy or?
Let me see. I mean, I remember the day I got sober. I got punched in the face. I got punched in the face, Joseph. Like, I mean, he punched me right into the rooms of recovery. Like, he hit me so hard. And
was it a homeless guy?
No. His name was Bull, if that tells you anything. He had just got out of the joint out of Arizona State Penitentiary and thought, accused me of whatever, like going through some girl's purse, like stupid street stuff. Like, what were you doing going through Kelly's purse? And it was one of the things, like, you ever, like, okay, so here's some street stuff. You ever get caught where your gut's telling you defend yourself, and you go to say, but here's the thing, I wasn't, and it's like you were waiting, and then the next thing you know, you get hit, right? And it's like, there was a missed opportunity there to either put your hands up or run, because it was coming, like a freight train, and there's nothing anyway.
Been decided before.
All the silver you see in the front of my teeth here, those are from a very similar incident. It's not just a fashion statement.
So you met Bull.
Yeah,
I met the Florida equivalent of Bull.
What was his cool name?
I kind of dust myself
like Greg
off
or something.
And I dust myself off and I walk downtown Tucson, and there's a social services agency. It used to be called COPE on 101 South Stone. And I walk in there, and there was a gay guy that I'd known from high school that had been a caseworker. And I wasn't on their caseload, but he had always kind of taken a liking to me, and he would give me food box and, other harm reductionist kind of stuff that they would do for the homeless. And he had always showed favor on me. Well, he had been seeing me around for 6 weeks, and unbeknownst to me, he had already kind of teed me up with a free treatment bed and was just waiting for me to show up again. Now, it's funny, this convergence of like events, like the synchronicity that is really the miracle at which the point of recovery is, because I walked in there to get a bus pass to go drink in Menlo Park. That was my only intention, was like, hey, let me get a bus pass. And you had to sign out a sheet where you're going to a doctor's appointment or done, whatever. And so I left it blank, and they said, well, where are you going? And I was like, detox. It was the first lie I could think of that came to my mind that sounded reasonable, right? Yeah. And he comes out of the back office, and he's like, tell you what, you don't need a bus pass. I'll give you a ride. And something like an intuitive thought happened. It was like a gift from the universe. And it was like, I very rarely tell this story, but it felt like this something very metaphysical and unseen woke up in my stomach. And this power told me, if you don't get in that car, you're dead. I cannot keep you safe out here any longer. And I was just like, okay. So I went around the corner and I told these like street people that were there, I was like, hey, I have a funny feeling I'm never going to see you again. And I went back inside and got in the car and we went. And I had and it's, Joseph, one of the things about this, I don't want to use the word miracle or whatever, get too Christian about it. But one of the things that's so funny about this recovery process for me is, as passionate as I am about the subject, I don't ever really remember making a decision to get sober. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It just
it just sort of developed. I mean, I remember, well, anyway, anonymity, I'm not going to go into that stuff, but I remember making another crucial decision that came a few months later, but I don't ever really remember deciding that recovery was a good idea, that it was something I wanted to do, that I was tired of quitting drinking. Nothing like that. Just didn't happen like that.
Right.
So.
And, to the normie, stories like this sound like, oh my God, like you should write a book. That's the most amazing thing I've ever heard. But go to a couple meetings and you hear these stories time and time again, like how common it is that it's just like, I don't know what intervened, but something happened. I stepped off a bus and there was this guy right there ready to, you know what I mean? Like all these things, like where it's just like this one moment in time where you could have very easily taken a left instead of a right. But for some reason, this little thing happened and the dominoes started falling and then here we are. You know what I mean? Like, and it's very common. It's just like, I always say it's like I had an antenna out when I was looking for trouble, when I was looking for, when I was looking for dope, or if I was looking for whatever it was, my antenna was up and I could find it anywhere. And then somehow when I was ready for help, or when somebody's ready for help, like these little things happen where it's just like, I don't know how it happened. I don't know why it happened, but it definitely happened.
Right.
For sure. Like one thing that's real cool in recovery is how like you're saying, right? Like these miraculous kind of wild out there things become very common, right? You hear everybody, we've all got friends who've got stories that share some of the same colors as Jeff's story, right? But then also like the common things become very miraculous to us, right? Like being able to pay rent without selling drugs, right? Not getting drunk for a year at a time, not getting arrested for a long period of time. Like those are all little tiny, miracles that are just commonplace. You know what I mean? It's like a flip-flop kind of happens.
Right. I find, in the beginning, it was like the earth had to almost like move in like 3 different directions at once, because I was in so deep, you guys. I was in so much trouble. So there were like these huge miracles, like in the courtroom, like I was looking at 8 to 20 years, and just different, that's what a meth lab will get you when you're caught with one, and in a number of things like that just happened that just really set me up with favorable circumstances. And I don't know, Joseph, anymore. Like, at 20 years sober, you're like, you know what? The toaster fixed itself. We were getting ready to buy a new one, and it's just like it's working fine. Like, you know what I mean? So anyway, they're less pronounced, but you appreciate them just as much somehow. So yeah. That's what a life of gratitude will do.
When my mind and my spirit is right, I appreciate them. Right. Sometimes I get a little sideways. But so Jeff, one thing that's really exciting to me about having you on the show today is that, TBI is one of the areas of addiction and mental health that I don't know a ton about, and that you're an expert on. So for my own edification and for our guests at home, what is a TBI?
So TBI is traumatic brain injury, right? And that can take as many different forms as the person who's carrying it. So I work a little bit. I'm a workshop leader with a group called Heal the Brain. That's an online series of free workshops, and all those people have had stroke and vascular injury, right? Like these are all people recovering from a stroke. Few have substance use disorder and other things. And then I also participate in a CTE group. Now, CTE is a little bit different because CTE is the result of subconcussive blows to where technically none of them in and of themselves would be considered a traumatic brain injury, except if you get 1,000 of them, subconcussive blows, what it results in is chronic traumatic encephalopathy. I think I'm saying that right. Like it's really a mouthful, and that's a degenerative neurological disorder where, especially, like there's some things you can do to cut some of the symptoms, but you're really teed up for a life of suffering. But I think of TBI oftentimes as a singular event that's had a catastrophic kind of result on the person who's hit their head. Now, here's where it gets tricky, and I'm not going to spend too much time in this, but I want to get into a little bit because it's kind of controversial.
Let's go.
In Western medicine, there's two things they're looking for. You can walk into an emergency room having fallen off a ladder, and they're going to give you the most basic scan, a CT or an MRI, and they're looking for two things. Have you had a stroke? And is there a bleed going on inside your skull? And is your skull cracked? And is your skull actually fractured? Those would be the two things of huge concern. Now, short of either of those two things going, they're like, clean bill of health, you're free to go. It's exactly what happened to me, and send you walking out the door with a lifetime's worth of problems, with a lifetime's worth of neurological problems, with a lifetime's worth of emotional problems. I mean, I'll give you, like, here's just one piece of what we talk about. I find this so interesting. So some of what I've been working on, Joseph, is how you take complex medical concepts and boil them down into like 8th grade language so people can understand it. But so
that's how you know someone's an expert. They can explain something really simply.
So there's a thing in the brain called the pituitary gland. It's between the two lobes, and it looks like a wilted tulip, and it's almost like rice paper. It's super small and it's super delicate. And outside of governing everything that happens to your body, the way you think and the way you feel, it really does very little. You know what I mean? It only does everything. And so by that I mean, here's how I think of it. So those people that anymore they have these 3D printers, and it's like, we printed a 3D BMW motorcycle. We 3D printed our own house on a printer. So your body's basically a 3D printer of itself. And that's to say, every single person on this website has an entirely new skeleton down to the last cell than the one you had in 2012. You have an entirely new bloodstream than the one you had in January. You have an entirely new skin suit than the one you had in February. These things are these things are always replicating themselves up to and including the injuries we inherit. And so what's creating that? Well, your hormones are both the ink and the printer that's replicating that program over and over and over. Like every freckle needs to be told to be a freckle, right? And so we all have 50 of them. We actually have the same 50 hormones as a giraffe, as a raccoon, as a dog, as a cat, as a horse. It's all the same. There's these 50, you've got your T3 and your T4 and your progesterone and cortisol, and they all have different functions, and they're different little messengers, right? And I think of it as like the brain's post office box that sends out millions of pieces of mail every day telling everything what to do. And I think of it as like a stereo equalizer. Like there's a homeostatic level where things are set to where we're either comfortable, or if we're in addiction, we're comfortably uncomfortable, but it's our state of homeostasis, whatever that is. And so what happens is, and now picture a Greyhound bus slamming into the post office, and there's mail and paper flying through the air, and some of the routes are stopped, and some of the mailmen aren't doing so good, and so on and so forth. And what's usually going to happen is your human growth hormone, is going to go through the floor which is your brain's only real ability to repair itself and actually heal. And then when all those levels, like the stereo equalizer, when those get out of whack, you ain't going to feel good. You're going to feel happy and you're going to feel sad. And part of my mission statement, I often wonder with the rough and tumble lifestyle that comes with alcoholism, I often wonder when we're bringing people in treatment and they're emotional, like why wouldn't they be? Addiction is emotional, right? But sometimes I think we're not asking the right questions. Like, hey, dude, have you fallen off a ladder any time in the last 6 months? Have you fallen down some stairs? Have you hit your head on the steering wheel? Because if you have, what's going to end up 2 months later looking like mental illness is actually a mental injury that has been unable to heal itself, and it's going to result in brain fog, it's going to result in memory impairment, and it's going to result in highs and lows that are going to look a lot like bipolar, a lot like borderline personality disorder. And the thing is but they need to be treated differently. This isn't a medication thing. This is a let's rehabilitate the injury thing. Let's get some blood work thing and see where your hormones are at. Let's get some microcurrent treatments going. Let's give you some neurofeedback and some self-regulation technique. And above and beyond all, the best thing you can do for yourself if you're out there, and this is really like pushing water uphill, but if you really want to and have the need to recover, take all the inflammation out of your brain. Quit doing the things that are bad for your brain, like smoking cigarettes, and start drinking 4 liters of water a day. Cut your carbs in half, or if you're like me, cut your carbs down to 0 and just take all the inflammation out. And picture it's no different, Joseph, than having a red swollen knee or a red swollen ankle or a shoulder that's like really tight and really sore. It needs microcurrent. It needs oxygen-rich blood flow. It needs for the inflammation to come out of there so it can breathe and receive nutrients and heal. Everything heals on the same principle. You know what I mean?
Jeff,
and
you're
so
blowing my mind, buddy.
Yeah.
right. So anyway,
I can honestly say that in all the years of me going to treatment and doing pre-screens and assessments, no one ever asked me, like, have you had a head injury lately? Or ever, right?
Yeah.
Well, so here's a really, and this is an industry thing, but here's a really controversial every treatment center I've ever worked, most of the programs I've ever worked in, they always called it a presenting issue, and they never called it a comorbidity, which it is. And I think, I'm just making this up, but I think the second you call it a comorbidity, now you're responsible to treat it like it was bipolar or schizophrenia or something like it. And so if you're dual diagnosis and you come in and you have 2 things going on, we should be treating both. And I don't mean there's some bad programs. I mean, almost universally across the board in substance abuse treatment, we don't treat traumatic brain injury as we treat it like you have club foot or dyslexia or something. We don't treat it as like, hey, there's a really complicating piece of this case that's going to interrupt the flow of treatment. If this person is real TBI, they're not going to take to the program like everybody else, because either they have so much brain fog that they can't hear it, or so much memory loss that they can't remember it, or their highs are so high and their lows are so low, they're going to ASA before anybody gets a chance to really have an impact on their life. And so
when you talk about that, right, like I think about how often in traditional treatment, right, when someone relapses or, AMAs or doesn't attend programming, right, we just chalk it up to the person not being willing enough. Right. And very often you'll hear in treatment, right? Oh, I guess he wasn't done, go have yourself an experience and come back when you're ready. And this, there isn't a lot of thought as to like, why is this person who yesterday was desperate to come get help? Why are they all of a sudden so resistant and unwilling? Right.
And here's the stigma with TBI. And listen, you guys, I'm about to own something with you, because when I say this statement, I'm going to raise my hand and say guilty as charged. Also, it's the reason I thought of it. But the next time you're in a grocery store and you see somebody with one leg, you'll notice that there's a sphere around them of maybe a 20-foot circle of some sort of reasonable acknowledgement, where people push their shopping cart out of the way, or it's like, please, after you, no, you go ahead, buddy. Hey, you doing
Yeah.
okay? Or they'll just kind of nod their head like, man, like that's got to be tough, But there's an acknowledgement in a circle around them, right? Of whatever the injury is. They have one arm, they have one leg. There's a clear disability. But when you're talking about a brain injury, right, this is embedded in here. And so when the person starts presenting their symptom to the rest of the group, well, I don't want to get out of bed. Well, my head hurts. Well, I don't feel good. Well, I can't stop crying. The room almost reads them like a hypochondriac. Oh, grow up. Grow up. You know what I mean? And they're not accommodating the injury like they would any other injury. And I got to tell you, I worked in treatment long before I assembled my own data, and we had some people in that, and it was just like, snap your fingers, like, buddy, what's it going to take to get you to get with the program? And I was saying that based on a fundamental misunderstanding at the time of what it was like to be in their shoes. And that's even with me being one of them, right?
Yeah. I remember, I mean, this had to be 13, 14 years ago when Celebrity Rehab came on. And Gary Busey was on there. And people were just like, this guy is a batshit fucking nut job. And then Dr. Drupinski explained that he had a motorcycle accident, and it was because of this traumatic brain injury that it changed his personality. And even with a doctor telling that this whole group of people that, they were still just like, nah, this guy's just fucking nuts, And that was the first time that I ever really became aware of something like that. Like, just because his family didn't understand like why his personality just seemed to be changing. Like it continuously got worse and worse and worse, compiled with the drug and alcohol, that he was throwing on top of it. But yeah, I mean, even with people like medical professionals telling people like this, you have to address this as a serious issue. And they're just like, well, it makes me uncomfortable, so I don't want to have to deal with it,
Jason, if I could make a comment
Go
on that.
Go ahead, Jeff.
And I'm going to do a little bit of a plug, and it's not really for the plug, but it's to demonstrate something. So I wrote a book about my experience growing up with an undiagnosed traumatic brain injury, which has since been confirmed. But I can't tell you how many people reached out to me and they said something like this. They're like, look, dude, I was just reading your book for pleasure, just for a good read. And as I'm reading it, they started remembering their own stuff. And like one guy said, he's like, I never thought about this in my entire life, categorically never thought it fit. But I remember after reading the book that I was a shy kid and I was a wallflower kid. And one day I'm out on the pitcher's mound and boom, get hit in the head with a softball. And I'm only lights out for about 5 seconds. And then 2 weeks later, I'm that kind of like jackass skateboard kid, like doing a double backflip off the apartment pool. And he's like, and it changed me. And I never assembled the data and put those two events together. And sometimes it's just a subtle shift in your personality. Like you're a little bit this way and you get hit in the head and suddenly you're a little bit that way. And you're just different. Things are different, all the way up the scale to being completely disabled, either in motor functions, either in thought patterns, either just like being wildly, wildly unhinged, and everything in between.
I've got a question, so we talk a lot about like recovery being a journey, right? It's like this process that you kind of continue on, if you're truly in recovery, right? So I'm curious, you spend the majority of your recovery having no knowledge or awareness or understanding of TBI, or that, you hadn't even figured out that you had one. So like, how did your recovery change once you just, discovered your TBI and began to treat your TBI? Like, how did it impact your recovery? How did it improve it? How did it change it?
Well, for one thing, Joseph, I felt really vindicated. I've spent so much of my past 2 or 3 years in additional learning, in certification, in PubMed, in science, research journals, in chat rooms, in talking with other people, in studying the latest. Most of what's really effective with brain injury is not covered by insurance, so it's considered experimental medicine or whatever, and yet it's things that really work. Anyway, so one of the things that began to happen with me is I was vindicated. Like People have told me, they're like, you don't seem to have problems with your motor skills. You have TBI. But then if you spent enough time with me, like Marie, our friend Marie, who's a therapist, she told me, yeah, dude, you're kind of an odd duck. I picked it up after spending a couple of days with you. You know what I mean? So it showed up in more subtle ways, but some of the vindication I received was like, as an example, I'd always had a terrible time making direct eye contact with people. It's like if I stared somebody in the face too long, I began to feel this immense pressure building up between my eyes and a forehead. It was almost like a sharp and jagged pain between my eyes that I'm looking at the wall or looking at my ceiling or looking at the feet. And the few people that have called me on it always told me, like, they intimated that there was something really wrong with my character. I've had a therapist tell me, like, maybe you're a compulsive liar, a sociopath or something. I don't know. Like, what is it with you and the eye contact thing? And as I'm looking at her, I feel this sharp pain in my forehead. I'm trying to stare at her and make a connection and tell her I don't know. Well, it's not until I met Dr. Gerald Kopernicki, who taught me all about ocular motor dysfunction. You have 8 sets of muscles and 2 sets of cable that hold the eyes in place. I don't know if you know this, but 60%, yeah, 60% of your caloric intake is used. Like every hamburger you eat, 60% of that is burned, basically processing visual information, 3 dimensions, very spatial. The traffic light is 60 feet away and there are 6 cars at varying, like that takes a massive amount of energy.
Yeah, there's a massive amount of information that we see at all times. Yeah,
right.
That makes sense.
And when you get hit in the head, it's almost like just that sudden jerk. For some reason, it's almost like deadlifting more than you're comfortable with, and you pinch it halfway up, and all of a sudden all those muscles strain and they twist, and and all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, my back, and now you're jacked up, right? That's what happens to all those muscles, and it creates what's called ocular motor dysfunction. So I had this doctor tell me, and he let me off the hook, and he's like, you're not a sociopath. You don't have a trouble being honest. He said, try and stare at a banana for 15 seconds and tell me how you feel. And all of a sudden I started feeling that sharp pain again. And he's like, it's not eyesight, dude. It's not looking at the people in the eye. It was any fixed point of focal concentration was always going to give you trouble. And everybody around you was misreading it your whole life. So
how liberating was that when you found that out, when you were like, oh, so here's what it is. There's an answer to this. And, it's not something that's, it's not my character, A, and B, now I could look into fixing it, which is something that we learn in recovery,
Right. It was like tears. I'll be honest. It was tears, and it was very vindicating, and it was very liberating. And it's really, this kind of thing happens when we go through the steps. And Joseph, I don't know if you're at this place in recovery yet, but this thing kind of happens when we go through the steps where we really take responsibility, and we get to this place in our recovery where we're like, I get it. It was all my fault. I owe amends. The reason the Christmases were ruined, like that was all me, me. I got it. You know what I mean? I'll make amends for it. But then you since arrive at this later point on the path where you realize that it was stage specific. That part of your recovery was necessary to get that. That was all my fault. But then I've come to understand, to a deeper understanding, and this is just on the addiction side, that I was driven to do those things, right? It says, crushed by a self-imposed crisis, I was placed in an impossible position to where my best option at the time was to do those things. And so it's like, so you kind of get to the point where, like, now that I've taken responsibility for it, I don't know that it was my fault. It's the way it was, and I needed to take responsibility for it. And then on the TBI side of things, it was very liberating to be like, you're not broken, and you're not damaged, and you're not sick, and you're not messed up. You're a guy that's had a physical injury that, just like any other injury, has come along with some symptoms. And, your alcoholism can wrap itself around something, or addiction, and be like, you get too many headaches, and it's like, God, I got a brain tumor. We don't know how to read ourselves, and so we always read it in a negative light. And I finally got to the point where I'm kind of liberated from all those stories. Like, no, I'm a kid that had a tough childhood, that was driven to do a lot of things, that had a brain injury, and considering what I'm coming from, I'm doing fantastic. You know what I mean? Like, really,
I think I have found that. I think I found it first for other people, though. You know what I mean? Like, looking at bad behavior that we see come from folks who are in their addiction or just coming out of addiction, and trying to find some grace for them, led me to discover a grace for myself. Which, you heard my joke about my internal monologue, right? Sometimes they're better than others, but I think I definitely understand what you're saying and have experienced some of that myself.
Right. So it's been neat.
We're getting short on time, Jeff. So
I know.
I think you've done a fantastic job kind of explaining to all of us like TBI and the different ramifications that can come from it and all that kind of stuff. But I'd like to kind of pivot a little bit to some of the hope stuff, right? So like, because it is treatable. There are interventions. There are things that can be done to improve folks who have TBI's lives, right? So I'd love it if you would talk just a little bit about some of that stuff.
Well, I'll start off by
the magnetic stuff and all that. All that cool stuff.
I'm going to start off by saying there's resources out there and lots of grants that are driving a few programs. Concussion Legacy Foundation being one. There's something called BIND here in Dallas. There's another BIND in Fort Worth, which means Brain Injury Network of Dallas, right? And there's these kind of clubhouses popping up around the country that do voc rehab and different kinds of things, and have like an intro to neurology. But as far as what's available to you, if you're a person that has resources, hyperbaric oxygen, which is what they used to put scuba divers in when they would mess themselves up, that's kind of the gray goose of, like, I always use liquor references. That's like the gray goose, like the top shelf of treatment. Now, short of that, there's a thing called Alpha Stem that both the National Football League and the VA uses for people that are coming either off the field with a concussion or coming back from Afghanistan that have been exposed to a bomb blast. That's a microcurrent device that will push your brain into alpha waves. It'll pull you up out of delta waves, out of depression, or it'll pull you down out of gamma waves, out of anxiety, and it'll just kind of from the inside out. It's almost like a TENS machine for your brain, but at a much milder current. And the alpha wave is pretty much the healthiest bandwidth in brainwave. You can look that up offline. That's Alpha Stim, STIM, and that's going to be effective. And you guys, again, I'm a big believer in functional medicine. I'm a big believer in integrative medicine. And the truth is food has the power to change anything if you can give yourself over to it. And I know that's hard for people with addiction and brain injury that are like living off McDonald's, but I'd be remiss be remiss to say it's like really bad for you. You know what I mean? It's everything you put in your body affects the cell wall on the other side of it. And up to and including all the ingredients. Joseph, I'm kind of turning into a hippie. It's a little weird for me too, I'll admit, but I'm like kind of turning into like a granola hippie. You know what I mean? So I've just learned too much.
As long as you're still going to the gym and lifting, you cannot be classified as a hippie.
There you go.
It counterbalances.
Yeah. I'm getting my Reiki 1 and Reiki 2 certification, and because I'm starting, like, again, I'm kind of going down that path, but I figured that would be woo-woo. It's a useful tool for what I'm doing. So I'm anything that helps Eastern medicine, Western medicine, functional medicine, experimental medicine. I come at it from every and any angle when I'm coaching somebody. Let's find out, kind of like what Recovery Unplugged does on a treatment modality. Let's come at it from every angle and find out what works for you. And then we'll go with that. Right. So
love it. Jeff, I got to tell you, I feel like me and Jason were really not necessary for today's episode. Like, it's been like, Jeff, talk.
This has been my TED Talk.
Would have just unloaded this amazing hour of thought. I love the way your brain works, but we are getting towards the end of our time. So we like to traditionally close things out with something that we call rapid fire question time.
Okay.
It's rapid fire question time.
All right. So, Jeff, you mentioned earlier that you've got almost 20 years sober. How many days do you think you've been sober? Quick.
8,211. I'm just guessing.
We're going to try that. Okay.
I'll have to take your word for it.
If Dr. Bob Smith played professional hockey, what team would he be on and what position would he play?
Oh, I feel like he would play for the Columbus Blue Jackets, and I feel like he would be a right-handed defenseman.
Yes. I love how quickly you came up with that answer.
That was quick, yeah.
All right. If you could pick one punk band to follow you around and provide background music for your life, what band would it be?
Oh, now you're killing me. That's so hard. Let me go with something current. We were just talking about, you know what? We'll go with something kind of vanilla, but we'll say Fugazi. Husker Du. Final answer.
All right.
Husker Du,
there
final
we go.
answer. Very
there we
nice.
go. Besides the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, what singular book has had the greatest impact on your life?
You could plug yourself if you want to.
Stephen and Andrea Levine, who are Noah Levine's parents, wrote a book called Turning Towards the Mystery that was fantastic.
Love it. Love it. Mm-hmm. And last but not least, we're going out. We're going to a burrito joint. Build your perfect burrito.
Oh.
Aren't you carb
With a
free though?
carb-free
Like
wrap, obviously.
It could be a bowl.
You know what? So back in Tucson, it was called like the California, right? And it was carne asada, which was steak marinated in lime and Worcestershire mixed with guacamole, tomato, and American cheese, and like a lot of it. And for me, I mean, every time I go back home, I go to my Arizona Peeps, Los Betos. You know what I'm talking about, man. That's good. So that's some good eating. But here's the thing, and Joseph, I know you know this because you're Spanish. I come from Mexican food. I live in the hood, and we have like lenguas and tripe and like all of it, right? Like all of that, all of the other parts, beef cheek and stuff that you don't normally get, and I'll eat that too. So,
Man, that's
Nothing goes to waste with Jeff Gould.
Man, that sounds like there used to be this place here in off of Old Torf called Super Burrito, and they had something they called like the Californian. It was steak and French fries.
oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
So good. They also had this one where they took flautas, glued them together with guac, and put them in a burrito.
Love that.
Oh my god, I'm so hungry. You guys stop.
Oh man, yeah, no, you know what? I am actually really hungry. I haven't had dinner, but Jeff, just one more time, I'd like to thank you for being here, for taking the time out of your day. It was, it's always a pleasure to just hear you talk. If you guys want to learn more about Jeff and his work, you can check out laborofloveintervention.com. His book that he mentioned earlier is called Life Concussed, and it's available on Amazon and wherever fine books are sold.
Actually,
and
that's
Jeff,
not true. It's just available on Amazon. But whatever.
So do you have any closing words you'd like to throw out there, Jeff?
You guys are a blast. We never got to tell good rock and roll stories. We admitted that whole part, but
All right, hurry. We still got a couple of minutes. Let's hear your rock
give us the rock and
story.
roll story, Jeff.
So, okay, I'm gonna try and speed this up. So I played in a band that was we talked about this, Jason. I played in a band when I was 19 that was part of a feminist benefit. We opened for this band called Burning Bush out of Phoenix, and I remember hearing at the time, like, this feminist benefit is sponsored by a band called L7, right? And so fast forward a few years later, and L7 was playing, and I had just been in a horrific car accident. I had my hand cut off, you guys, in a car accident, sewed back on.
What?
And I'm like,
how did we gloss over that?
It's a long story. So I'm walking up this alley with like my hand stapled on, like, and I've got this sling, and like, I'm walking in the alley, and there's just this tour bus just motoring right there. And all of a sudden the door opens up, and this girl kind of leans out, and it was Jennifer Finch from L7. And she said, "Hey, what happened to your hand? And I was like, it got cut off in a car accident. She was like, no. And they all lean out the door and they're like, dude, can we see it? And I said, yeah. And I got on, I took off the bandages and they're like, oh. And then I said, hey, I was on a bill that was like, and we started talking music and they're like, yeah. I remember that. Oh, you were that guy. And they're like, and you've been in this horrific car accident. And they're kind of drinking and getting kind of flirty with me. And they're like, hey dude, you want to go on tour with us? Like, we'll just roll with us and we'll just buy you a bus ticket back from Los Angeles when we get home. And you guys, even after losing my virginity, I suffered from terminal virginity. I was like so shy and so awkward. And I'll be honest, it flipped me out, man. Like I was like, I could feel my skin getting hot. Like, oh no, like I want to say yes, I want to say no. And I didn't do it. Biggest regret of my life, bar none. But they were playing to a sold out crowd. And I remember it almost makes me cry when I think about it. Because I remember to 2,000 people, the very last thing they'd said was, and this last song goes out to Jeff Gould, and they started playing American Society and just dropped it and just crushed it. And it was like, and I was in a pretty dark spot, dude. And like them dedicating that song to me lifted me up. But my one regret, my one regret, if I could go back and do that over, dude.
A bus full of rockin'.
Just get on the bus and let them do whatever they want and just be you and do you. And like, you're going to be okay. You'll get home.
Dude,
okay.
that story was a whirlwind. Like there were layers on layers in that.
Yeah.
Well, Jeff, you are definitely
lessons to be taken from that story.
You are definitely the most accident-prone guest we've had to date so far, and it's been an absolute pleasure. I learned quite a bit, so I really appreciate your time, Jeff. This has been great.
Absolutely. Hey, after we close it out, hang around for get out.
We always do.
Seconds.
We always do.
Perfect.
Until then, everyone out there in Toxicology land, as we like to say, there's 1,000 ways in and 1,000 ways out. We hope you find yours. Don't forget to like and follow.
And subscribe.